Chapter 12. Standing at the door to my shop, handing out candy to all the kids that passed by always made me smile. They were so fun to watch as their faces lit up when I would give them handfuls to each kid. Max was standing beside me, watching the interaction. I had to admit this was new territory for me, and I knew it had to be with a demon. Of course, once he was in his true form, things would be changed back. He will become cold and ruthless, creating havoc where he wished. Thankfully, on Sunday, I still get to visit Betty. Max will no longer be in his human form, and knowing Betty, her wards will hopefully keep him out long enough for me to get some answers. I saw Marcella making her way towards my store. This woman has just got to go away. "Jane," she called out. I felt Max's mood darken instantly, which still dropped the air around us quite a bit. "Marcella," I said. She waited till all the kids were gone, and she stood in front of me. "Have you reconsidered selling me that book?" she asked. "No, Marcella, and I never will. The book is not for sale ever," I said, rubbing my forehead. "I see Tom finally realized that dating you would be detrimental to his job," she said, smirking. I rolled my eyes at her jab. "I guess so, but it just goes to show what a loser he must be to listen to someone like you," I said, crossing my arms. I felt Max's arm come around my waist. Marcella noticed this, and her eyes narrowed at me. "Why is this book so important to you?" Max asked her. She looked at him with a smile. "Because I am a great witch and need it for my collection," she said proudly. Max busted out laughing. "A great witch, huh? I don't think so. You see, a great witch doesn't go around demanding anything. They are giving, wonderful people, and you are definitely not that," he said. Her mouth dropped open. Even though most people do not like Marcella, she comes from a family of money that started this small, crappy town. So everyone just lets her be. Max is the only male that has actually told her the way things are, and I was proud of him for that. Demon or not, it still made me feel good to have at least one person on my side. "I will curse you, Jane Wolfe," Marcella said as she smirked at me. I laughed right in her face. "Go for it, Marcella, and that will be the last thing you do. Remember, I am a true witch. You are nothing but a joke," I said, walking towards her. She backed away and turned around, almost running away from me. I looked around, and the only person I saw watching us was Tom. He was standing on the other side of the street. I stood there looking back at him. I'll be damned if I retreat inside my store. He walked away from me, not the other way around. I could see the uncertainty on his face. He was having a war inside himself. At this point, I didn't care. He chose his side, and I chose mine. Max came to stand next to me, and he put his arm around me, pulling me to his side ever so slightly. I knew what Max was doing, and I didn't care anymore. I was really considering leaving this town once and for all, but first I needed to talk with Betty before I made any moves. Tom's face darkened when he saw what Max did. The fury behind his eyes was noticeable, even from a distance, and it was directed at Max. Max turned me around, and we went back into the store. I closed up and decided to go home. Since I lived on a dirt road on the outskirts of town, I knew no kids would be coming to my house. I placed a few orders at the diner for dinner, bringing them home. Max made a fire while I went and soaked in the tub for a bit. Once out, I put on a little nightgown that was dark red. I walked out of the bedroom and stood there. Max looked up, and I saw his eyes change from brown to his normal yellow and red color. He stood up and walked over to me. "I know this is our last night that you are in human form, and I want a memory that will last me," I said as I placed my hands on his chest. He stood there as I undressed him. Once he was naked, his hands gently slipped off the nightgown. We stood there in front of each other. "I don't want you to leave," I whispered as he picked me up and laid me down on the blankets he had placed in front of the fire. "I don't want to leave you either. I'm enjoying being able to spend time with you," he said as he leaned over me, kissing me. We spent the next few hours making love to each other in front of the fireplace. It was tender and gentle, everything that I could have ever wanted in a partner, but will never get while living in this town. Laying in his arms, the clock chimed, letting me know it was midnight. I sat up, looking at Max. With tears in my eyes, he gently kissed me. "I will always be around you, my Jane," he whispered as his human form began to disappear. "I will wait for you," I whispered back as his human form vanished from sight. I felt the coldness in the room, but my body was too numb at the moment to notice. I lay down on the blankets, and I could still smell his scent. After crying for a few hours, I was finally able to drift off to sleep. Chapter 13. I woke up feeling drained. I didn't want to do anything, but I had to talk with Betty. I needed to get back to who I used to be before all of this. I texted Betty to make sure 1 in the afternoon was still okay for me to come over. She responded right away, saying yes. I took a shower, and sitting at the table in my robe, I sipped on my coffee, looking out the window. It looked just like how I felt, miserable and cold with a few raindrops. I looked at the time, and it was only 10 in the morning, so I made myself get up and throw in a pile of laundry that I had been neglecting, made sure the dishes were done and the floors were cleaned. My phone buzzed as I was taking a break and having some coffee. I opened it up, and there was a text from Tom. "Hi, Jane. I hope you're doing okay. Would really like to talk to you when you have the time." I sat there looking at his text. I wasn't going to respond to it for some time. He had a lot of nerve asking if I was okay after he decided he didn't want to soil his name by dating me. I looked at the time, and it was 12:30. I put on my coat and grabbed my purse. The drive would take about 20 or so minutes. I took my time driving to her place. Her home was so adorable. It was all fieldstone with flowers in the window boxes in each window. It was like a home out of a painting. As I walked up to her front door, it swung open, and Betty stood there with her arms open. I walked right to her and felt her arms wrap around me. I knew with her being a witch, but she was also an oracle. She knew things that no one else did. One of the reasons why Betty and I got along so well, she was always right there making sure I was okay. "Let's get you a cup of tea and sit by the fire. We have a lot to talk about," she said as Betty took my coat. I sat down, and she brought me a cup of tea. After a few sips, I was slowly starting to warm up. She sat there quietly watching me, letting me talk on my time. I looked at her, and the tears started to flow. "I don't understand this, Betty. I know he's a demon, and he is cold and calculating, but in human form, I fell for him. We were always together, had the best sex, and he was so kind and wonderful. Now that he is back to being the demon of darkness, I'm lost without him," I said as she handed me a box of Kleenex. "There are a few things that I ought to know. 1, he treated you with such kindness and love because you never had that before. He knew this and knew it was a way he could show you how he cares for you. Demons are smart beings. I saw him with you when you weren't looking at him but doing your own thing. Somewhere along the way, that demon fell in love with you, Jane. I remember the story of one of your ancestors that married and had children with a demon. It is extremely rare, as it never happens but once in a few thousand years. There's something about you, my dear Jane, that pulls to him, since you have a little bit of demon blood in you, that it could call to him. This area is new to me, but I can see that you both fell in love with each other, and he didn't want to let you go," Betty said, sitting there with a sad smile on her face. "What am I to do now?" "What are your choices?" she asked me. "Well, he wanted me to move away from this town to a new place where I wasn't bullied for who or what I am. Basically, move to the mountains or somewhere like that so we can be together. There was something else he told me, that he could permanently inhabit a body for as long as I was alive, I said, sitting back. Jane, be careful with that one. The person this demon takes over loses everything. The demon is in control, but the body can't sustain a full life of a demon, unfortunately, she said. Only time I can be with him physically is near Halloween for 3 days. Then just like this morning at midnight, his physical form dissipated. He went back to his demon form, I said, finishing my tea. Maybe in a year a move might be good for you, she said with a wink. I laughed. She was one for half riddles while telling me things. Why in a year? I asked her. She stood up and walked over to me, bending down on her knees. May I? She asked, pointing to my stomach. I rolled my eyes. There was no way, but I was game. Sure, I said, leaning back against the chair. Betty placed her hands on my stomach. She closed her eyes and slowed her breathing. Her eyes opened and they were white. She was in her psychic mode when she did that. After a moment, she blinked and her eyes went back to normal. She sat at my feet and cried for a moment. Your love for each other was true. As rare as it is the truest of love, she said as she stood up and went to her chair. I smiled a sad smile while watching the fire, remembering his touch before he transformed. One other thing, Jane, Betty said. I turned and looked at her. What's that? I asked. You're pregnant with his baby, she said, looking right at me. Are you being serious? Don't play a joke on me, Betty, I said as my hand went right to my stomach. I'm being dead serious, Jane. She is half demon, half human. She's going to be beautiful and headstrong. You must move before you give birth, she said. Why? I asked. There will be trouble for you if you don't, my girl. Not sure from whom, but it won't end well if you stay, she said with sadness in her eyes. I knew her well enough that when Betty gives you a warning, you take it seriously. Chapter 14. My store was always closed on the weekends. It gave me time to place any new orders or to make sure certain ones were shipped out. After I left Betty's house, I drove to my store to pick up some things that I had left at the office. I locked the door behind me and left the lights off. I wasn't sure if Tom still had the cameras working or not, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went right to my office and turned on my desk lamp. I was hoping Max would show up. I knew that wasn't his real name, but I felt better calling him that. I sat down and let out a sigh. What was I going to do now? Was I really pregnant? I looked down at my stomach, and my hand automatically went there and started to rub in small circles. I missed Max, and I wanted to tell him what Betty said, but what good would it do? I couldn't physically touch him or see him for another year. I grabbed a few order sheets and turned on my computer. I wasn't ready to go home just yet. I spent the next 2 hours at the computer, filing out order requests and emailing the customers. I liked letting them know that I'd be shipping out their items by the end of the week at the latest. My stomach started to grumble. Looking at the clock, it was already 5 in the afternoon. The diner would still be open, so I shut down the computer and put on my coat. I grabbed my purse and decided to treat myself to dinner. After locking up the store, I walked to the diner. The air held a threat of snow, which I was fine with once I got home. I sat at the back in a booth. After placing my order, I sat there looking out the window. People would look at me, I would smile, but I would only get scowls in return. I let out a small sigh. This town would never change. Maybe it was time I looked for a new place to live, selling the store in my home and start fresh somewhere else. Can I sit with you? Tom asked. I looked up and gave him a small smile. Of course, I said. He sat down across from me. I could tell he hadn't been sleeping very much with the dark circles under his eyes. Jane, I texted you, but then I saw on the cameras you were at the store for a while. I was about to go see you there until I saw you sit here by yourself, he said. I had some orders I needed to place and wasn't in the mood to cook, I said, watching him. The waiter brought me my food and looked at Tom. Tom shook his head no, and the waiter left the bill at the table. I sat there to the other side. You can have some of my food if you want, I said as I put the ketchup on the side of my plate for my fries. Tom took a few, and we sat there for a bit in silence. There was the elephant in the room that neither one of us was ready to bring up. Listen, Jane, I really want to talk to you about a few things, but not here with so many people around, he said quietly. I rolled my eyes. What was that for? He asked. Listen, Tom, you knew that I liked you. It took a year for you to finally ask me out. I never hid what I was or what I did. You were fine with that as far as I knew, until that bitch opened her mouth and all of a sudden I wasn't good enough for you. So forgive me if I'm a bit hurt and cynical towards you, I said, looking at my food. Jane, Tom says he reached out for my hand. I let his hand touch mine. His warmth felt good on my cold bones. It doesn't matter anyway, I said, mumbling more to myself than to him. What doesn't matter? He asked. If you want to talk privately, then come by tonight at my home. If not, then it's whatever, I said, pushing my plate away. I had lost my appetite and was ready to go home, crawl under the covers and sleep. I left a small tip and went to pay the bill. Tom followed me out of the diner to my car. I will see you tonight, Tom says. He held my door open for me. I looked up at him, into his eyes. I could see he was still at war with himself. That was his issue to bear, not mine. I got into my car and drove home. Once home, I took a shower, then put on my comfortable nightshirt. I made myself some tea and wrapped myself in a blanket. I was going to wait up for a bit to see if Tom really would show up or if he would disappoint me yet again and not show up. Chapter 15. I heard a knock at the door. I glanced at my watch. It was close to 11 at night. Cutting it close, I thought as I went to answer the door. Tom was standing there with a bouquet of flowers. Come on in, I said, moving out of the way. Once Tom was in, I shut the door. These are for you. I owe you a million apologies, but I wanted to start with something that I know you love, he said as he handed me the flowers. I put them up to my nose and inhaled the beautiful scent. Thank you. These are beautiful, I said as I walked to the kitchen to put them in a vase. I set the flowers in the middle of the kitchen table. The roses were a burnt orange color along with yellow roses mixed in. Perfect fall colors that seemed to fit the kitchen at the moment. Come sit in the family room, I said as I made my way to the couch. Tom sat next to me, his knee slightly touching mine. I could feel his warmth, even with a slight distance between us, and I missed it. I have thought about everything these past few days, and I was wrong for picking others over us, over you. I don't know if you still feel the same about me, but my feelings still haven't changed for you. I would like to take you out for dinner and spend some time with you, he said, looking at me. What about your job and the townsfolk? You know they won't stop bugging you about dating me, I asked. To hell with them and the job if it means not being with you. I can't stop thinking about you, Jane. I want to be in your life, to spend the nights with you, he said, reaching for my hand. I placed my hand in his, looking deep into his eyes, searching. I don't know, Tom. My feelings haven't changed, but you really hurt me, really bad. I'm going to have to think about it, I said. I was being honest with him. I fully understand that, he said, squeezing my hand. Do you have to go back to work? I asked. Not tonight. I checked out, and if you'll have me, maybe I could stay and watch a movie with you, he asked. I would like that, I said as I went and locked the front door, turning off the lights except for the glow of the television. We wrapped up in a blanket after I put on an old classic that we both agreed upon. I laid my head against his shoulder. Before I knew it, my eyes were getting heavy, and I felt myself falling asleep against him. I woke up in bed under the covers. I sat up, remembering that Tom was here. I looked over, and there was a note on the pillow next to me. Jane, You looked so peaceful while you slept against me. I didn't want to wake you. I just couldn't leave you on the couch, so I put you to bed. I enjoyed spending some quiet time with you last night. I hope that you will think about what I said. I truly meant every word." I lay there rereading his note. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I did know that even if we worked on things on a friendship level, that might just be what I need right now. Only time will tell with Tom and how he acts with me in public. I looked over at the clock and saw it was already 8 in the morning. I pulled the covers over my head and rolled onto my side. I just might fall back asleep and forget about today. But then I had to be there when my new shipment arrived at the store. I was getting in a shipment of crystals, incense, and a few other odds and ends. Putting away the shipment in the back room, I was waiting for the air to change. It never happened. I was starting to wonder if the demon finally left me for good. I had no idea what goes on with demons after their human form disappears. My grandmother wouldn't talk about anything of that kind. "Just never mind about those," was her go-to whenever I would ask questions. I heard the door chime, hoping it wasn't Marcella as I walked out of the back room. "Hi, Jane," Betty said as she walked in. "Hi, Betty," I said with a warm smile. "What brings you in today?" I asked as I went to where she was standing. "I had a weird dream last night that Tom came to see you and wanted to get back together with you. But there is something different about him. I saw him earlier and said hi. He just looked at me as if I never said a word. He turned around and walked the other way," she said. "Well, he did come over last night asking to get back together. I told him I had to think about it, and then I fell asleep. He put me to bed and left me a note, and I haven't heard from him since," I said, sitting back down behind the counter. "I'm going to have to look into this," she said with a wink. I trusted her when it came to her insights. After she left, she went around and I made sure everything was in its place and the shelves were dusted. I turned off the lights, and before I locked up the store and left for the night, I stood there, listening to the silence. "How I wish you were still here with me," I whispered into the darkness, waiting for a response. But none came. I closed and locked the door. I went to my car and drove straight home. Chapter 16. I heard my phone go off. I grabbed it and opened the text. "Jane, I need to come see you." Wonder what's going on now. "Hi, Tom. Sure." I texted and hit send. I laid back down on the couch. I didn't even realize I had fallen asleep. Looking at my watch, it was 1 in the morning. There was a knock on my door. I didn't want to get up, but I couldn't remember if I locked the front door or not. Getting up with a groan, I walked to the door and opened it. Tom stood there, and he had a strange look on his face. "What's the matter?" I asked as I moved to the side so he could come in. He stood there looking at me, and before I knew it, he was in front of me. I went to say something, but he kissed me. It wasn't a soft, tender one either. It was forceful and full of desire. Tom pulled back a little bit. We stood there breathing a bit heavily, searching each other's eyes. "I'm sorry, Jane. I needed to feel you. I have been going insane not being able to kiss you. Last night I wanted to so badly, but I was afraid you would slap me and tell me to get out," he said. What did I want? Did I want to start again with Tom? I was scared of getting hurt again. I didn't say anything, but looking up at him, I smiled, and I kissed him. He took that as my answer, and his arms went around me, picking me up, never breaking our kiss. He carried me to the bedroom. My alarm started to go off, so I turned it off. I lay there for a second till I remembered what happened last night. I took a deep breath, and while letting it out, I turned slightly and saw Tom was still here in bed with me, sound asleep. I smiled, seeing that it wasn't a dream after all. I took my hand and carefully tried not to wake him up. I traced the side of his face. There was no going back now. I'm sure the townspeople were going to have something to say about this to him, but that was going to be his burden to deal with. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen, started up my coffee pot, and pulled out eggs to make for breakfast. Tom's arms wrapped around my waist. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said as he kissed the top of my head. I leaned my back into his body. "Good morning," I said. I set our breakfast on the table. Sitting down next to Tom was a nice feeling. "I really enjoyed last night," Tom said as he started to eat. "Good, because I did as well," I said with a slight smile. We sat there in silence, eating our breakfast, but it was a comfortable silence between us. "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure," I said as I was finished eating. "What happened to that guy Max? I haven't seen him around," Tom said, looking at me. "He went back to where he was from," I said quietly. "Do you miss him?" he asked. I looked up at Tom. Did he really want the answer to this question? "Yes, I do, Tom. During the time he was there, we grew close," I said, looking at him. I wasn't going to hide anything from Tom. He asked the questions, so I was going to give him honesty when answering them. "Speaking of people, it has been nice to not have Marcella breathing down my throat. Did you tell her to back off of me?" I asked him as I got up and took our dishes to the sink. "No, but I doubt she'll be a problem for you anymore," he said. I turned and looked at him. "Why do you say that?" I asked. I had a bad feeling in my gut all of a sudden. "We found her dead yesterday inside her home," Tom said in his matter-of-fact tone that he uses for unpleasant topics. "What happened?" I asked as I sat down. "No forced entry. Everything was locked from the inside, but she looked like she had been drained. Nothing left but a shell of what was once a human," he said. "Holy shit," I whispered. I didn't like the woman, but I felt slightly bad that she was gone. At least now I wouldn't get hounded for the book nonstop. I didn't dare say that thought out loud. Tom was already looking at me, and it wasn't that look from a boyfriend either. It was more from a detective look side of him. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked. "What look?" "You know the look, the cop side of you look," I said, grab a cup of coffee. "Sorry, habit. I know you two were not close, but I know there is no way you could have done the things to her," he said, but his voice trailed off. I sat there with my mouth hanging open. He couldn't possibly believe that I had anything to do with it. "You're right, Tom. Marcella and I didn't get along, but there was no way I would want anyone dead," I said. He nodded his head, but didn't say a word. Chapter 17. After Tom left, I was still in a mood. He assured me that he wasn't looking my way when it came to possible suspects, but it still bothered me that he was implying I might have had motives. I took a quick shower, stripped my bedding, and put on clean sheets and pillowcases. If this was how the beginning of our relationship was going to be, I wasn't sure I wanted the rest of it. Deciding to open the store later, I was going to start looking into new places to live and get an idea just in case Betty's feelings were true. My cell buzzed, and I opened it and saw a text from Betty. "Jane, Tom has been snooping around talking to people about yours and Marcella's relationship and who this Max guy was." I blew out a breath. So it has begun already. "Thanks, Betty. Yeah, Tom was over here, and he said he didn't expect any foul play from me. But who knows what he is thinking? All I know is I don't like the feeling I'm getting from him. Keep your head up, and Jane, did you forget you're a witch? Protect yourself. Do what needs to be done." She was right. I was so used to suppressing my witch abilities to try to fit into this town that I should be using what I was given instead. "You are so right as usual, Betty. Keep me posted on anything, and I will do the same with you." I hit send and stood up. I needed to get into my closet and open my trunk. It was time to dust off my gifts and start being the witch I was desperately trying to hide. I drove to my store and kept the sign to close. I scribbled a note and stuck it to the window. "Sorry, but the store will be closed for a few days," was all I put on it. What I needed to do was going to take a few days to complete, plus the amount of energy that was needed for my work I was going to need to be home. After filling up my bag of things from the store, I put on my coat and grabbed my purse and the bag. I locked the store back up, and before I got into my car, I saw Tom standing across the street watching me. I waved and smiled. He didn't do either back to me. Rolled my eyes and got into my car. "So, this is a game you're wanting to play, Tom?" I said out loud. I drove home, blocking all thoughts of him. It was time this town remembered who I was, but most importantly, it was time I remembered who I was. Once inside, I closed all my curtains, lighting the fireplace. I made a fresh pot of coffee and made a plate of crackers and cheese. I'd like to snack on things when I was setting up my things to do some work. I went to my closet and grabbed my chest. Putting it in the family room, I opened it up and smiled when I saw the Book of Demons sitting there. I placed it on the coffee table, along with a few black and red candles. I also took out my bag of herbs and a smaller bag of black salt. Once everything was on the coffee table, I closed the chest and put it aside for now. The coffee beeped, letting me know it was ready. I made myself a cup of coffee and grabbed a plate of crackers and cheese. I sat down on the couch. As I ate, I looked over everything that I had on the table, making a checklist in my mind of what I was going to need. Sitting there, the air stirred around me, but it wasn't heavy, as if it was Max was around. Looking into the fire, I wish I knew where it was. I knew before I began I wanted to change into my clothes that were comfortable. After I finished my snack, I took a quick shower and put on the clothes I picked out for this. I grabbed my spell book that I had hidden away in my bedroom. Chapter 18. Lighting the candles, I had them placed around the room and 2 on the kitchen table, but in front of me I had my black and red candles going. In my small pot, I put in my herbs, a few drops of different oils. Before I lit my 2 candles, I anointed them with a few different oils as well. I put a few pinches of my black salt in the pot. Once that was done, I lit my incense stick and placed it inside the fire as well. I took a deep breath and slowly let it out as I centered myself. Opening my spell book, I found one that would protect me from any wrongdoing. I wasn't sure who was working against me, or if it was just how some things went, but I wanted to protect myself anyway. I call to you, my protector, guardian of my soul. I need protection from any foes that dare come after me. I need to be safe from anyone who has ill intent against me. I am free of any wrongdoing, but I need your protection. Hear my call, my guardian spirit. I chanted this 4 more times. I felt the air stir as a cool breeze gently moved around me. As I mixed the herbs and oils together, I cut a small part of my finger open, letting my blood mix in with the mixture I already had prepared. The air was starting to stir again, but a bit more forceful. I looked at the Book of Demons, unsure if I should open it or just let it be. The Book of Demons slid off the coffee table and onto the floor. That was what I needed as a sign. I grabbed the book, and as soon as my blood touched the cover, it unlocked itself and opened to the page that I knew all too well. The Demon of Darkness Incantation. My fingers traced the words on the page. I could feel the heat from it, and it started to pulsate as if a few drops of my blood fell onto it. Closing my eyes, I knew what I needed to do, but I had a lingering doubt in my mind as if it was truly needed. The air became heavy around me. It felt as if the air was caressing me. A tear escaped down my cheek. "Max," I whispered. The book pulsated more as I spoke his name that he had given me the first time he was in human form. "Demon of darkness, I call to you. I need you here with me, protecting me in the shadows of those who wish to do me harm. I call to you in your powers at this time, demon of darkness." I took a breath. "Max, my demon of darkness, I miss you. I need and want you with me. I can't do this without you, my love. I am in love with you. I added those last lines. Something inside of me stirred, telling me I needed to say those lines as well. A tear escaped from my eyes, and as it caressed my face, it fell onto the page. The book slammed shut on my lap. I opened my eyes, and all the candles had been blown out. Only light came from the fireplace. I saw a figure standing in the darkness. It was standing in the corner watching me. I blinked a few times, trying to get my eyes to adjust to the darkness. It didn't move, just stood there like a statue. My hopes faded when it didn't move towards me. I was hoping it would have been Max. But now I wasn't so sure. I cleaned up all of my supplies and put everything away into the chest. I put the chest and the spell book back into my closet and shut the door. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I went to the family room. It was silent, and no figure was standing in the corner. I left the lights off, but added another log to the fireplace. I sat on the couch and wrapped a blanket around me. Settling in, I sipped on my coffee, thinking about the spell work that I did. I hoped I did the right thing by also calling for Max. He never said I wasn't supposed to. Setting down my coffee cup, I closed my eyes as I lay down on the couch. I didn't want to sleep on my bed tonight. Not ever again, without Max. Chapter 19. I woke up to my phone constantly ringing. "Hello?" I asked, sitting up trying to clear the fog from my mind. "Thank goodness you are all right, Jane. I have been worried about you," Betty said. "I'm fine, Betty. Just taking a few days for myself is all, and I must have slept in," I said, getting up to make some coffee. "I had a feeling you have finally tapped into your powers, my dear girl, and you brought something back that was gone," Betty said quietly. "I needed to protect myself, Betty, like you said," I said as I was sitting there waiting for my coffee to be ready. "Can I come over later on today?" "Of course you can, Betty. I'll be there in a few hours," she said and hung up. The coffee beeped right after, and I needed the caffeine this morning. I was hoping she was talking about Max that I brought back. Tom had proven to me that he wasn't meant for me, like I thought at first. I got up and got my coffee, walked to the window, and drew open the curtains. The sun was out. The sky was a bright, beautiful blue with no clouds around. The trees were all sorts of vibrant colors. I could tell it was still cold out, but I could face anything like a day like this with hope in my heart that love was somewhere coming to me. I spent the next few hours baking up a storm. I made cookies, a cake, a loaf of bread. Looking around, you would think I was going to host a party. I heard a knock at the front door. I opened the door, and there stood Betty. As soon as she saw me, a smile fell from her face. She walked right in and shut the door, looking at me for a moment, then pulling me into a hug. "Betty, what is going on?" I asked her when she let me out of her arms. "I need some coffee and a few of those amazing cookies you just baked," she said with a wink. I laughed as we walked into the kitchen. She sat at the table taking a cookie while I poured us both a cup of coffee. I handed her hers, and I sat down with mine. I sipped with my coffee, waiting for Bay to explain why her expression changed when she saw me, and what was with that message earlier. "Okay, now that I have recharged my batteries for a bit, I had to come see you. There are a few things going on that I don't like," she said. "Okay," I said, steadying myself for what she was about to tell me. "Tom isn't letting up on the death of Marcella. He has been going around talking to people, and the gossip is he thinks that somehow you are involved. Not directly, but he can't put his finger on it," she said, grabbing another cookie. I laughed at that one. "Is he serious? He comes here asking for another chance. Next morning he tells me about Marcella, and now he thinks I somehow mysteriously had a hand in it and won't talk to me. What an ass," I said. "I told him to pull his head out of his ass. He has messed up a good thing with you, and that you are in no way involved with anything like that," Betty said. I smiled at her. "Thank you. At least someone in this town has brains in their head," I said, sipping my coffee. "Now, for the next thing. When you were doing your protection spell, did you call Max back?" she asked. I did, I said. She looked down and took a breath. Then she looked up at me. Jane, you do realize that with your blood and calling him back to you, you have bound yourself to him permanently. I know this, Jane. I thought about it, and I can't live without him. I don't know how to explain this, and I know you must think I'm crazy, I said. Actually, Jane, I don't think you're crazy at all. I know your family history, my girl. I know you come from a line of demons as well as witches. It only seems right for you to fall in love with a demon, she said, reaching for my hand. I placed mine in hers. It was nice being able to talk about everything with Betty. She was my only confidant and witch in this town, and I trusted her. What am I going to do about Tom? I asked her as I poured us more coffee. Let me worry about that man. He seems to forget that he wasn't born in this town, she said with a wink. I lightly laughed, knowing full well that Betty would put it on him good. We sat and talked about everything under the sun for the next few hours. Once Betty left, I saw it was time for dinner. I got dressed and decided to go to town and eat at the diner. To hell with these people anymore. Plus, I can check on my store. Chapter 20. Sitting in the diner, I could hear whispers about me and that being a witch, I probably hexed Marcella. I sat there smiling at the stupidity of it all. My food arrived and the waitress bent down and whispered that she was sorry I had to hear this stuff. I smiled and told her it was okay. I was used to it. I knew the waitress. She was a year younger than me in school and was always picked on since her family was poor. I sat there eating my dinner and looked out the window. The sun had set and I could see that it had started to rain. The weather station predicted the possibility of snow earlier this year, but it was November now, so anything is possible. The diner became awfully quiet when the door chimed. I didn't pay attention. I just wanted to sit and eat my dinner in peace and quiet. "Is this seat taken?" I heard Tom ask. I glanced up and went back to looking out the window. I wasn't in the mood to talk to him, so the silent treatment seemed the best option at the moment. "Glad it is," Tom says. He sat down across from me. I watched him through the window. He sat there watching me. I steadied myself before I looked at him. When I turned my attention to him, I saw he was sitting there watching me intently. "You have a lot of nerve sitting here with me," I said in a tone that was full of ice. "I want to explain," he said. "I don't care about anything you have to say anymore, Tom. We were supposed to work on getting together, but instead you go around trashing my name, thinking I'm somehow involved. What the actual fuck, Tom?" "I'm sorry. I let the fear I have override the actual facts," he said. I noticed he wasn't in uniform. "Why aren't you in uniform?" I asked, eating my fries. "I resigned," he said. "Good. You sucked at your job anyway," was all I said before eating my burger. Tom laughed at what I just said. It wasn't meant to be funny, but listening to him laugh, I cracked a small smile. "Did Jane Wolfe just smile?" he asked as he stole a few fries. "No, you're seeing things now," I said. He knew me well enough that I would become sarcastic when I try not to laugh at something when I wanted to be mad at a person. Tom straightened his back as a few people came walking over to where we were sitting. "You know, Tom, it is a good thing you resigned. We can't have an officer of the law sitting with a wish that sleeps with the devil himself," an old woman said. I looked up at her and laughed. "Damn, Lori, thank you for giving me that much credit. To where you think the devil himself would sleep with me," I said and gave her a wink. All three women gasped and turned and walked out of the diner. My waitress smiled at what I said. She walked over and told me dinner was on the house since I had to deal with the crap. I thanked her. She walked away and I went into my purse and pulled out 2 20s. "What's that for?" Tom asked. "Don't you worry about it," I said, getting up and going over to where the waitress was standing. Without saying a word, I slipped the money into her pocket and went back to my table. "You always seem to amaze me every day with how you are with some of the people in this town," Tom said, sitting back watching what I just did. "Well, I need to go check on my store, then I'm going to head home. I hope you have a good night, Tom, I said, standing up. Let me walk you to your store, he said, following me out. I stopped and looked at him. I will be fine. You go home or go do your thing. I will talk to you later on, I said, as I turned and walked into a hard chest. I froze for a moment and inhaled a scent that my body had been craving for a week now. Max? I barely whispered. I didn't want to look up in case it wasn't him, but I felt a finger under my chin and gently tilted my chin up. My eyes roamed his massive chest, up to his neck, those lips. Then I saw his eyes. As soon as I saw those eyes, I let out a cry and threw my arms around him. I didn't care who was watching. He picked me up as my legs went around his waist and my lips were on his. I pulled back slightly and saw he ever so slightly showed me his yellow and red eyes. Right then and there, I knew my demon was back. I laughed and kissed him again. I heard a throat clear behind me. Max growled so low that his chest vibrated. I smirked. Max set me down. I turned around to see Tom standing there. I guess you got your wish, Jane, was all Tom said as he walked off. Chapter 21. I grabbed Max's hand. We rushed over to my store. Once inside, I locked the door and went to my office. Once inside, I looked at him. Was he really standing before me? I took my shaky hands and placed them on his chest. He was solid. Looking up into his eyes. You're really here, aren't you? I whispered, as I couldn't trust my voice not to crack. He placed his hands over mine and smiled at me. I'm really here, my Jane. I never thought in a million years that you would call to me, asking for my return, he said. His one hand traced the side of my face. I leaned into his hand. How? When you said the spell, at the end when you called for me to come, I heard your voice, the pain and longing for me, the tears that were shed that held so much love and warmth in them, your blood that spoke of eternities together, and our unborn child that grows inside of you, he said in a warm tone. I opened my eyes, and his other hand rested on my stomach. Our baby grows strong in you, even though she is small as she can be. I can tell she's going to be powerful, he says. He leaned down and kissed me. I kissed him back with every ounce of love I had in me. I poured it all into that kiss. We broke apart, catching our breath. How long are you here for? I asked. I had to know how long. Forever, my Jane. I was granted one wish. I wish to be with you, to spend my life with you and care for our baby, to help her grow, he said. Are you still a demon or just a human now? I asked. Both. I am still a demon with my powers, but I will age as a human, so when I die, that will be it. I will forever be a demon, never to be a human again, he said as he took my hand. Placing a kiss on it, I couldn't help but shed the tears I had been holding. I finally got a man who loves me for who I am. Let's go home, my Jane, he said. I smiled and agreed. We locked up the store and got into my car, which was a feat for Max to do since he was so big. Once home, we spent the rest of the night having the best sex one could have. The rest of the week I stayed home with Max. We made up for that week he was gone. It felt so good to be with him. You couldn't tell he was a demon. Only time is when he was angered. Then his true form would appear in the shadows. I heard my phone buzz. Max looked at me. Go ahead and see who it's from, I said. I was in the middle of making dinner. Max opened my phone and chuckled a bit. It's from Betty. She is wondering if she can come over tomorrow for dinner to meet me, he said. I smiled. That was Betty. You can answer it. I have no problem with her coming over. It'd be nice for the two most important people to finally meet, I said, as I was putting the potatoes in the pot. Hi, Betty. This is Max. It would be great to meet you, and Jane says yes to dinner. Good. I'll be there around 5, and Max, do not hurt my girl. I won't. She is my other half. Max set the phone down and got up. He walked over to where I was standing and wrapped his arms around my waist. His large hands rested on my stomach. I leaned back against his body. Chapter 22. I woke up to the sound of Max's voice booming through the house. I got up and walked out into the family room. "What is going on?" I asked, trying to shake the fog from my brain. "This is what is going on," he growled and pointed outside. I walked over to where he was standing and looked out the window. "Well, I see we're back to the 17th century, apparently," I said, rolling my eyes. Half of the townspeople were out on the street in front of my house with signs telling me to burn in hell where I belong, that I was a devil's bride, and so forth. "I should just devour all of their souls right now and be done with this," he threatened. I smiled at him. "Love, you can't go around just eating souls because they're idiots," I said, patting his arm. I went to the kitchen to start up the coffee pot. Max walked over to where I was standing against the sink. He bent down and kissed my neck. "You forget, my Jane, who I am," he said as he sank his teeth into my neck. I let out a moan of pleasure. He released my neck and picked me up, carrying me to the bedroom for a few hours of wild, passionate sex. We spent the day laying around watching movies, and there was a knock at the door. "I will get it," Max said as he got up from the couch. I watched him walk to the door, my core ignited. He turned and smirked at me. Max opened the door, and the shouts grew louder. "Jane!" Betty said as she rushed in right past Max. "I'm on the couch," I called to her. Betty was sitting next to me in an instant and pulled me into a hug. I hugged her back. "Everything okay, Betty?" I asked, looking at her. "This town has gone insane. There are whispers of burning down the houses of every witch," she said, shaking her head. "Well, we knew one day it would probably come to this," I said as I leaned back against the pillows. "True, but I didn't see it this bad," she said, and then her head swiveled. I watched Betty look at Max. Her facial expressions were priceless. "Betty, I would like you to meet Max." "Max, this is my best friend Betty," I said, smiling. Betty stood up and she looked Max up and down. "Holy hell, are you big?" Betty said. I laughed at that statement. "Nice to finally meet you, Betty," Max said in his thick accent. "Now I see why Jane couldn't let you go. This woman has been in love with you since she first called you to her," Betty said. "Betty?" I said, shocked as she told him that. "What?" "He had to know how you felt about him all this time," she said. "Still," I said, covering my face and hearing Max chuckle. I heard the timer go off. Thankfully, I was saved. I got up and went into the kitchen while Max and Betty sat on the couch talking about the people outside. I guess after all these years I had grown numb to it all. I was just hoping it would die down after a while, like it usually did. But something was feeling different this time. I just couldn't put my finger on it. After dinner, all three of us sat around at the kitchen table. "Betty, why did Tom actually resign from his job?" I asked. "He was asked to. His boss wasn't too happy that all these bodies were being found, and he hadn't even produced any evidence," she said while sipping on her coffee. "Oh?" I said, puzzled at how he never did. "Plus it didn't help that his main theory was that you were summoning spirits to do it," she said, snickering. My mouth dropped open. "Are you serious? That was his only theory?" "Yep, and his boss about lost it on him, that he needed to stop going on a witch hunt," she said. "I'm surprised he isn't out front screaming at the top of his lungs with the rest of the idiots outside," I said, standing up and walking over to get more coffee. "Jane, be careful with Tom. He has something to prove now that half the people think he has lost it," Betty said, looking at me with a concerned look on her face. "I can feel something in the wind, Betty, and it's not going to be good for us," I said with a sigh. Max stood up and walked over to where I was standing. "Sweetheart, nothing is going to come near you and our baby. Trust me on that," he said as he kissed the top of my head. I looked over at Betty, and she sat there smiling. She had a knowing look on her face. Some days I wish I had the gift that she was given. After Betty left, Max and I sat on the couch, laying my head on his shoulder. I was seriously wanting to move now. "Where do you want to move to?" Max asked. I forgot that he could still read me. I felt his chest move. He was trying not to laugh when small things would dawn on me about him. "Somewhere away from all this, a place where we can raise our daughter in peace and where people won't be bullying her like they do me," I said as I closed my eyes. I felt his lips on top of my head. "We will find the perfect place, sweetheart," I heard him say as I drifted off to sleep. Waking up to the smell of coffee was a nice treat. I stretched my body. Laying in bed, I glanced out the window. I sat up, slipped on my robe, and went to the window. A smile developed on my face. Overnight, it must have dumped a ton of snow. It looked like there was at least a foot of it on the ground. Everything was so beautiful. Looking up at the sky, it still held dark clouds overhead. I felt Max standing next to me. He handed me a cup of coffee. No words were spoken as I sipped my coffee, leaning my head against his shoulder. We stood there looking at the winter wonderland that developed overnight. Thankfully, with the snow, the idiots weren't outside. Chapter 23. I knew we weren't going anywhere today. The road crews were going to be a while, and I was fine with that. Walking into the kitchen, Max was building a fire while I refreshed my coffee. Sitting on the couch, I watched Max move around the house. As big of a man as he was, he had a lot of graceful movements. "I think we should move somewhere secluded," he said as he sat down next to me. "That would be nice. I can still run my online store, just not disclose where we move to," I said, sipping my coffee. Max nodded. "It actually would be nice to move where the witch community was actually a lot larger and people were fine with our kind," I said with a sigh. "I know in this day and age some areas of the country don't mind the fact that there are witches living amongst them. Then there were some towns like this one that I'm living in that still prefer to burn us alive." "Maybe Betty might know some areas. Maybe she could move with us," Max said. "That would be nice if she would," I said. I thought about talking to her anyway about some areas, and maybe with how this town was becoming, she might be safer if she did move with us, even if it was for a short time. I went and grabbed my laptop from the bedroom and sat at the kitchen table. I wanted to see if the Wi-Fi was working and make a list of what we wanted. Max sat there watching me while I went about the house, while I was talking to myself about what is an absolute must in a new house. "You are something," he said with a smile as he got up and walked over to where I was standing. "Good or bad?" I asked as I leaned into his body as his arms wrapped around me. "Always good, my Jane," he whispered as he kissed the top of my head. I heard my phone buzz a couple of times, so I went and grabbed it off the kitchen table. "Who's it from?" Max asked as he went to get more coffee. "It's from Betty," I said. "Jane, are you there? Jane, you need to answer me, please." "What's the matter, Betty?" "Jane, if you can, you might want to go to your store." "Betty, what's going on?" "I don't know if I can." "I hate telling you over text, but the townspeople were picketing in front of your store, and the police think that a few people set it on fire." I dropped my phone and went to grab my jacket and purse. Max picked up my phone and read the messages from Betty. The deepest growl I've ever heard come from Max. He put on his jacket, even though he didn't need to, but he wasn't about to let people know what he was. So he dressed and played the part. "Give me 5 minutes," he says. He slammed the door shut. Max was clearing a path. No one bothered to call me. Typical of them. "How did you find out?" "Really, Jane?" I reread my last text and a small smile formed. "Sorry, just pissed off and not fully there after the message." "I know. I'll be there soon at the store." I closed my phone and put it in my purse. I paced back and forth from the window to the other side of the room until Max came in. "Okay, all set," he said, and we left the house to go see what was left of anything of my store. Chapter 24. Sitting in the car, I couldn't believe that there was nothing standing except a pile of charred remains of what once was my beautiful store. that I put everything into. I got out and stood there, not knowing what to do. I wanted to scream and cry, but I stood there just staring. Miss Wolf, I'm Detective Latz. I will be the one investigating this case. I turned and looked at this man. He was an older man, probably in his 50s, but I didn't recognize him. I don't know you, I said, turning back to the smoldering rubble. I was called in, since no one on the police force has ever dealt with this kind of thing, Detective Latz said. Do you have any suspects yet? Max asked as he walked around and stood next to me. I could feel his heat radiating off of him. Not yet. It is too early to tell what actually went on, Detective Latz said as he kept looking at me. I turned and looked at him. Well, whatever you need from me, I will give it, but I want whoever did this to pay, I said. I could feel myself getting angrier by the minute. Here is my card. I will be in touch, and tomorrow I would like you to come to the station so I can take your statement. I will be there, I said as I took his card and put it in my pocket. Jane! I heard Betty's voice coming up from behind me. Once I saw her and her arms were around me, the gates opened and I started to sob. We held on to each other for a few good minutes. She let me hang on to her as if she was my lifeline. Once I was done crying for now, I backed up a bit and looked into her eyes. I need to know, Betty, I said quietly. She nodded and looked around. Tomorrow I will be over and we can do our thing. It will take me a bit to gather my supplies, she whispered. I hugged her once more. Betty took off to talk to the detective while I turned and looked up at Max. I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. We were definitely going to have to move. After this, I was scared to live here anymore. They could go after our home next, and with me being pregnant, I couldn't take that chance. Not anymore. I don't think there's anything we can do. We might as well go home, I said, looking back at the site. Let's go get some food and bring it home, he said as he put his arm around my shoulder. As we walked to the diner, people were passing us by, full of whispers, and some were just staring at us. I ignored them for the most part. Some I stared back, and they turned away. This town was full of secrets, and they knew what happened to my store. But with small towns, no one would talk. Thankfully, I had insurance on my store, and even if it was arson, I would still be covered. I paid a ton for it, but since I knew a few that were not happy with the store and had a couple of threats over the years, I did what I needed to protect myself. Once inside, Max placed our order to go. I went and sat down at my usual spot in the diner. The waitress we had the other day came over with a cup of coffee for me. I looked up at her and gave her a small smile. I am so sorry for the loss of the store. If I hear anything, I'll make sure to tell the detective on the case. Plus, I will text you, she whispered into my ear. I mouthed a thank you. She smiled and walked away. Max came over and sat down from across from me. He sat there silent, the storm brewing, which I knew was not going to be good for this town. But right now they were lucky I didn't release a whole horde of demons on them. They were going to get one of the deadliest demons, as it was. The demon of darkness was one of nightmares that they were not going to wake up from. The waitress brought over our order, and I went to pay for my coffee. She put her hand on mine and shook her head. A tear escaped down my cheek. You were always nice to me and took care of me a few times after school. This is the least I can do for your kindness, she said as she walked away. That one will be safe, Max said as he watched the waitress walk to the counter. I smiled at him. Ready to go home? I asked. Always, he said as he stood up. He grabbed the bag with one hand and took mine in his other. We walked out of the diner and to our car. I chuckled a bit hearing Betty telling the detective he better do his job right and not to mess it up or he will be dealing with her. Max even chuckled hearing it as well. I texted Betty, let her know that we were heading home for the night and I would see her tomorrow sometime. I put my phone in my purse, and once home, Max put our food on the plates and we sat on the couch with our food and found a movie to watch. Chapter 25. Laying in bed, looking out the window, I didn't want to get up this morning. I didn't know what to do now. I knew I had to go make a statement, but my store was all I had. It has been a part of me for the past 10 years. Just like that, it was gone. Just because some people didn't like what or how I was. Working a spell with Betty was needed, at least for a small piece of my mind. I had to let this detective do his job, but knowing this town, no one would be charged. They would say it was faulty wiring or something to that effect. Watching Max, I knew it was just a matter of time before he went hunting. I had a feeling he was waiting for Betty and myself to find out who did it. "Good morning, love," Max said as he brought me a cup of coffee. I smiled at him. "Good morning, love," I said, sitting up and taking the cup from him. "What time is Betty coming over?" he asked as he sat down on the other side of the bed. "Not sure. I need to text her." "I also need to go to the station," I said with a sigh. Grabbing my phone, I turned it on. No text, but one missed call from Tom. He didn't leave a message. So I ignored it and wasn't about to call him back. "Morning, Betty. I'm going to go to the station in a bit. Once I'm home, I will text you." I set the phone down and decided to take a shower. Maybe that would even out my mood for right now. After the shower, I dressed in my black jeans and a black sweater that had a small dark rose in it. Put my hair into a ponytail and decided on the basics of makeup. I checked my phone and still no text back from Betty. Max drove me to the station where I answered questions for over an hour. Once outside, I decided to sit in the car, glancing at where my store used to be. I held back the tears. There was no use in crying over what was gone. At least now I had my online store and some of my supplies at the house. I needed to put up a notice that the online store would be in vacation mode until I restocked my inventory. I checked my phone and no text still from Betty. I looked at the time and it was already 11:10. If I didn't hear from her by noon, I was going to call her. I wasn't sure if she slept in or just wasn't paying attention to her phone. She had a bad habit of doing that from time to time, putting her phone on silent and forgetting to check it every now and again. Car ride home was silent, but I was fine with that. My head was leaned against the window as I watched the world go by. Everything was covered in snow, most untouched. The sun made it look like a million tiny diamonds that were glistening under a bright light. Max pulled into the driveway and growled. I looked over at Max and then turned my head to see what had put him in an instant bad mood. Oh, for hell's sake. Tom was standing at my front door with a small bouquet of flowers. "Why is he here?" Max asked. "No idea," I said, getting out of the car and walking to my front door. "What do you want, Tom?" I asked, looking up at him. I noticed Max was still in the car. "I wanted to give you these flowers. It's my way of saying I'm sorry to you for how I've been acting," he said, handing me the flowers. "Thank you for that, Tom, but you didn't need to bring me flowers, especially since I'm with Max," I said, turning to see Max walking this way. My body shivered slightly at the sight of Max. He was full height, shoulders back, and his chest slightly puffed out. But what made my body shiver was the fact that underneath that exterior was a demon who was about to rip Tom's skin off his body. "I didn't realize that you were a couple now," Tom said, backing up slightly. "Yes, you did," Max said as he walked up and stood next to me. I looked at Tom, then at Max. I put my head down. 1, my neck was going to get a kink in it, and 2, I wasn't in the mood for the male crap. I unlocked the door and went in, shutting it on both. I could hear voices being raised and my eyes rolled. I decided on a cup of hot chocolate, and a nice warm bath would do me a world of wonders right about now. After an hour of soaking in the tub, I got out and put on a nightshirt that went below my knees. I knew it was still early out, but I just wanted to be comfortable until Betty arrived. Which she should have already been here already. I grabbed my phone, saw it was 1:15. No missed calls or text. Okay, now I'm getting worried. I went to the kitchen to make myself some tea and called Betty. There wasn't any answer, so I left a message to call me right away. I leaned against the counter, waiting for the water to boil. I jumped a little as Max snuck up behind me and kissed my neck.